Warren of Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our country faces a shortage of over 7 million homes, and families across this country in cities and suburbs and rural areas have seen their rents and their mortgage payments skyrocket. Addressing this challenge is going to take major federal investment to expand the supply of housing. And the longer we hold out on this, the harder it's going to be to solve this problem and help families. Today, though, I want to focus on one piece of the problem, the housing crisis in Indian country. In 2018, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights published a report called Broken Promises, which found that the federal government has woefully underfunded programs for Native people across the board in healthcare, in education, in public safety, and yes, in housing. The barriers that tribes face in accessing existing federal resources has compounded the housing challenges for families living on tribal lands. Ms. Yentl, your organization, NLIHC, has done extensive research on our country's affordable housing needs, including the housing needs in Indian country. Can I ask you just to describe the current state of tribal housing?
Yes, thank you, Senator Warren. Families in tribal communities have some of the worst housing needs in the country. They are 5 times more likely to live in deep poverty and in poor housing conditions than the general population. They are 5 times more likely to live in homes that lack indoor plumbing. They're 4 times more likely to live in homes that lack a refrigerator, a sink, or a stove. They're much more likely to have heating issues in their homes as well. And overcrowding and homelessness is also a significant challenge in tribal lands. About 16% of tribal families in tribal communities live in overcrowded housing. Okay. Compared to about 2% in the general population.
So thank you for your research on this. This is just an incredibly bleak picture. A 2017 HUD report found that at least 68,000 new units, and that's probably an underestimate, are needed to address substandard and overcrowded housing conditions on tribal lands. And yet federal funding for tribal housing programs that are critical for developing new housing, for performing essential upkeep on existing homes that are falling apart, and for keeping families in homes has all stagnated. We need to build more housing. We need to build better housing in Indian country to ensure that the federal government lives up to its trust and treaty responsibilities. Now, one place we could start is by ensuring that Indian country can access the full array of federal programs that support affordable development and preservation, particularly in rural areas. And that is why I am introducing a bill to guarantee that tribes receive at least 5% of the rural housing resources provided by the United States Department of Agriculture. Ms. Yentl, would my bill help address the housing challenges that families face on tribal lands today?
It would. The tribal communities that have the most significant housing challenges tend to be those that are rural and remote, in the plains, in the Southwest, in Alaska. And one of the challenges that they face is that they're not able to access other resources from federal departments, in part because the population of those tribes is often undercounted, and so they're not able to get the resources that actually they're entitled to and certainly need. So your bill would certainly help ensure that some of these poorest communities with the greatest housing needs could access a whole array of resources that could help with development in their communities.
Thank you. That is a really important point you made. You know, there's a clear need not only for additional federal housing resources on tribal lands, but also ensuring that the tribal nations can access these resources in the first place. And that's what this bill is all about. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to get this bill passed and to start making good on our nation's promise to Native people. I want to close with one last point in my remaining seconds here. Today's hearing is about bipartisan solutions to this country's housing challenges, and my bill does this without adding any new funding. But we know what addressing the housing crisis across this country is going to take: more federal investment to build more homes. And yet, we have too many Republicans who have said they will not support meaningful housing investments. In fact, we have Republicans now who are threatening to default on our national debt unless they can get cuts to housing resources, among other vital programs they're trying to cut. So I hope my colleagues will come to the table, get serious about doing what we need to do to solve the housing crisis for American families. It is important that we do this, and it is important in red states, blue states, everywhere in America. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Chairman.
Senator Warren. Senator Britt from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.